Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The SPA in Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is intentional living. Amazing people like you share ways to live by design and with purpose to ensure that this short ride of life occurs with choice, physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-giving knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and creating a positive impact through intentional living. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Laban Ditchburn, a child badly affected by divorce and dysfunction who sought validation and escapism in all the wrong places. Through self-discovery, not being afraid to ask for help, and a ton of hard work, Laban conquered the full gamut of addictions: alcohol, sex, gambling, drugs, and negative self-talk. By understanding and then reverse engineering the root cause of why he needed to escape, giving up his addictions was almost effortless. These days, and now looking in front of him, is getting his high from ultra marathons, which is nutty, mister, and searching the planet for the world's best steak. Laban, welcome to the show.
Diane, lovely to be here with you. Thank you for having me today. What a thrill.
Well, let me ask you first here. A lot of times we talk to people about moving past fear. How does steak help you do that?
I've done a lot of work in this on myself in the last few years, especially Diana. And one of the things that helped me the most was realizing the difference between fear and bravery, right? And courage. And there isn't much of a difference for me now. The state that I get myself into has played a huge role in being able to achieve what I've been able to achieve in the last few years, especially. But I look at it from a place of, well, what's life going to look like if I don't attempt this thing, or if I don't put myself in a position where I can fail? And I don't look at failing as a bad thing. It's just an opportunity to grow and to have lessons.
Nice. I love that. And, as all of us, we go through so many different things in life. There's disappointments, there's not living up to our potential, and times that we feel disempowered. And for you particularly, you hit a low point in 2015. Share a little bit about that.
So it's interesting, Diane, because on the surface of my life at that time, I didn't really look like someone who was falling apart at the seams. And I had a good job. I was making six figures working in recruitment back in Australia, and I had friends, and I had bosses that liked me and how reliable I was, and I posted happy birthday on people's Facebook page, and I was a high functioning alcoholic and gambler degenerate in the shadows. But the facade that I had on the external, if you interviewed or spoke to people back then, they'd be probably none the wiser. But my life was spiraling out of control. And I found myself at one particular point back in Australia, on a Tuesday night, with about 3.5 bottles of, appropriately priced Pinot Noir coursing its way through my vein. And I was gambling on a horse race in a country that I wasn't in, and I wasn't even able to see it on the TV. And I was putting bets on, and I was just refreshing the page to see whether I'd won. I wasn't even enjoying the horse racing component. Real degenerate behavior. And I saw a phone number in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen of the laptop that I was gambling on. And I'd never seen this number before, never noticed it. And I just called it instinctively, and it was the number for the Gamblers Helpline. And this woman, whose last name I'll never know, Diane, but I'll call her last name Magdalene because her first name was Mary. She listened to me without judgment for the first time in my life. And I just verbally diarrheaed everything that had been going in my life to her. And she listened with the patience of a saint. And just as she was about to break, I stopped and she said, and shared with me about the incredibly high rates of suicide that problem gamblers experience. And it floored me, like versus alcoholism and drugs and the other addictive behaviors, because of how quickly people lose everything.
Right.
And that put the fear of God into me. And she put me in touch with a gambling psychologist whose name was Lee. And this darling woman had the privilege of receiving an hour each week for a year, and then every fortnight, every 2 weeks for 6 months of me just unloading all of my stuff onto her. And it was also that process of being heard without judgment and allowing me to articulate what was happening in my head that started the healing journey. And so as I stand here before you at the time of the recording, I'm very proud to share that in this year, it'll be 7 years since I touched a drop of alcohol, longer for gambling, longer for drugs, longer for mucking around with other women and cheating and stuff, and limiting beliefs and negative self-talk and autoimmune disease that I was able to sort out as well.
Right. Well, it's amazing. Any one of those things would be, can be challenging for people. Why do you think you were able to kind of just stop the flow of that very quickly?
It's a question that I still ask myself, because I reckon if I could like articulate it into text form or some kind of speech thing, that it could be incredibly beneficial. But I think the simplified answer really is that I removed the desire to want to escape. And you touched on it when you were reading out my bio before, right? Mm-hmm. I removed the desire to want to escape. Like, what are we running from? I was forced to confront a lot of the stuff that I was dealing with, which for me was nothing more innocuous than being a child of divorce, right? And parents were ill-equipped to esteem themselves, let alone their kids. So I didn't go through horrific, sexual childhood abuse. Not that you should ever compare yourself to anyone else or diminish your own experience. But for me, mum and dad were in custody battles, and there was foster homes and kids being used as leverage, and it really negatively affected me. And when I came to learn that mum and dad weren't doing any of this stuff deliberately to try and hurt me, and that in fact it could be my new superpower, I didn't hold so much power, I didn't give it so much power and put any resentment to it. So it made forgiving infinitely easier. And then, like, why would I continue to do these negative things and ruin my own life when I can do good stuff and have a much better life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so amazing when we can ask ourselves some powerful questions and be able to say, like, how is this happening for me, right? And start looking at what are our lessons, because that's what makes us unique. That's has us look at things from a very different perspective. One of the things I really enjoyed about, you have your own podcast, and your interview with Les Brown, the legend Les, is really amazing. And one of the things that he talked about is 2 important days in your life, and one being born, and the other is discovering, your reason for being here. So you've talked about, for yourself, have you discovered that? What is your reason?
Yeah, it's the day you were born, the day you realize you were born, which for me was, I think 2018, 2019, I had that moment, right? You would think I would remember it to the day, but like, it becomes less important once you figure it out. But it is the single best thing I ever did for myself, taking the time to get that answer, right? It took a lot of work for me. Now that I've done the work, I don't think it's quite so challenging, but it was so worth the effort, because when I did that, Diane, it allowed me to step into my greatness, and at least to this point in my life, it's to be known as the world's most positively influential speaker. Because who would ever aim to be the second most positively influential, right? Yes. And people might hear that and they might go, oh, that's an arrogant, cocky thing to say. Well, it's not. It's this is what I've been given, right? Like, to the best of my understanding, this is the gift that I've been given by the universe, until such time as it evolves. And it's constantly evolving, by the way.
Right.
It's as my confidence grows, as my ability to recognize and pay attention to the signals, it's evolving. But that, to answer your question, that's the answer, to be known as the world's most positively influential speaker.
What I love about that is, a lot of times people are like, well, how can you say you're the world's greatest? And I actually today, when I was leaving my MMA gym, and I saw on the kind of like the billboard in front of the building, and it's Steel MMA. And one of the things, it had a quote from Muhammad Ali, and he said that I started calling myself the greatest before I actually was. Right. And so we live into these declarations, this way of being, we're talking about living an intentional life, about how we create that and the road there. And until we actually put that into our brain as a desire, as something that we want to leave as an impact in the world, you want to start at the top, right? You want to start with that in your brain so that you can now start building the seeds that grow that have you really start discovering that. And I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah, well, 100%. And the only people that give me grief about it are the ones that haven't done the work. and it's usually because they're telegraphing their own insecurities and frustrations at not stepping into their own greatness, right? And there's no judgment from my end. They'll figure it out eventually. I don't need to spend a lot of time with them. But like, we created a mastermind group last year called World's Best Mastermind. And it was for other people that have made a declaration of being the world's best in their chosen niche. And like, legitimately, Diane, we had 4 Hall of Fame speakers in there, of which there's only 250 that have ever lived. It was like, and Les Brown was one of them. Like, when you ask him what he's the best in the world, he's the world's best transformational speaker, right? Like, he's got that title. And yeah, there might be a bit of conjecture about him and ET and a few other people, but for the most part, like, most people would refer to him as that. And so we actually created something truly magical. And I witnessed the transformation in people's lives when they started making their own declarations of being the world's best. And the context for people that are curious to try this themselves, right? It was a non-quantifiable statement and an intangible one. So you're not saying I'm the world's best 100-meter sprinter unless you are Usain Bolt, right? You're not saying that you're the world's best transformational speaker, and unless you've been given that accolade. For me, it was the world's best courage coach, right? Like, until there's a competition held out of Las Vegas, Nevada every year to nominate the world's best courage coach, no one can take that title away from me. And it's not done from a place of ego. It's done from a state of declaration, so that every morning when I wake up, Diane, I'm like, oh man, like, I've owned this now. How would the world's best courage coach conduct himself? Yeah. And so my behavior perpetually has to level up, and I have to operate in integrity and in alignment. And it's only a good thing for the world when a lot of people are doing it, I'll tell you.
Right. I first heard of this concept with Bo Eason, and it was actually part of one of his mastermind called The Best. Right. And it was about making that declaration. And he talked about, there's the Declaration of Independence, but what declarations do we have for ourselves? And in that, we actually wrote out what it is that we are declaring to be the best at. And everyone there actually signed it as if the forefathers were signing the independence. And, putting it on that paper and seeing it. And then, like you said, that's just the beginning. Then you live into it. And that's what we start seeing in terms of freedoms and how we want to live our life. Is it's one thing to have it written on a piece of paper, but then what are you willing to do to live into that, to actually create the life that you want to live? So I love this foundation that you're putting out there, is saying like, oh, no, declaring it is just starting the ball rolling. It's what are you doing day to day to live up to that?
That's so interesting. I never knew about Bo. I don't really know much of his work at all. And clearly, if other people are coming up with these ideas, then there's some validity to it, So yes. I have to check him out. I have to have him on the show.
He's awesome, definitely. So, so you are an author and you've written like several things. And so what do you want people to know about your written word?
The book for me was a divine download, right? And I know people say that, but it truly was. Like I never finished school, I never went to college, never wrote anything of any significance. And when it came about through an experience with Les Brown, I realized that there was a higher power at play that wanted me to have this out into the world so that other people could read it that were where I was 5 years before I hit my rock bottom and maybe not do as much damage. Not that I'm wanting to change any of my history, but like there's better ways of going about how I did my stuff. But writing the book for me was incredibly cathartic, Diane. It was one of the most healing experiences ever. And I would encourage anyone that feels compelled, that has a message that they want to share with the world, like write it down and do it. Write it like no one's ever going to read it, but then write it in a way that you would want to hear your story told back to you. So mine's deliberately storytelling only. And I wanted to make sure that it was really wildly entertaining, real, and because I don't really care so much what people think of me. And you can see that in the way that I wrote the book. And it's not done in a self-deprecating humor kind of way. I've just taken ownership for all the stupid shit that I did and put it in the book. Because it's important not to leave anything out, I think.
Right.
I want to be high integrity, like I keep saying, is very, very important to me. So It was a real thrill. One of my favorite things I've ever done for myself, and I'm waiting for the inspiration to finish the second one.
Nice. Well, it's important to put all of those different things because you learn from those experiences. And for anyone going through challenging times, people, experiencing like, well, how am I going to move from where I'm at? When they get to actually see in print, the step by step of evolving into those things, that gives people hope. It gives them an opportunity to change the way that they're doing things so that they can make those kind of declarations and they can show up differently in life. So I love that.
Yeah, no, thanks. And some of the feedback that I've had from people that know me and that don't know me is that it's a different book compared to what they normally read, because there's no finger waggling. You know what I mean? Like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Kind of like at the end of every chapter, there's like a story written in the way that I know how to write, and then like one or two Laban's random lessons that because you only need to take one thing away from a book for it to be incredibly valuable and worth your time. And there is a lot of resources out there that, sometimes they're trying to leverage just the knowledge of other people and trying to, it's a bit out of alignment, but like I wanted it to be fun and for people that resonate with me to enjoy it and for it to be a pleasurable experience. So hopefully I've done that.
Yes, definitely. So I know that a lot of our listeners are listeners, right? That they listen to the audio of the podcast. But for those that go over and either on YouTube and see the visual of us actually talking to each other, you are in your signature attire of wearing a jacket without a shirt. So I'd love for you to share with everyone, where did this look came from?
So this is, thanks for bringing this up, Diane. This is a crushed velvet jacket that I actually got married in last year in Las Vegas. And my wife and I live in Playa del Carmen in Mexico, which is in the Caribbean coast, and it's hot. And when we moved from Australia in 2021, I was like, this is not sustainable, like wearing my suit jacket and my shirt, it's too hot. Even with the air conditioning going, I'd be sweating profusely. So I just started wearing the jacket without the shirt on underneath, and it just kind of stuck. And some of the feedback I got from some of the male guests that I was interviewing that were of, significance, applauded the courage and the bravery of putting myself out there. So it's kind of like a little bit of shock factor, but also just to give people some more inspiration and their own courage to be themselves. Like, this is who I am. I have a lot of fun with this. I don't really wear a shirt ever in Mexico. And we're in India at the moment where the culture's, not conducive to me being butt naked. So that's kind of where that's started from. And it's also like an incentive for me to stay in shape, because it's no good for the audience of me if I've got a big belly poking out of my jacket here. So
hey, whatever gets an incentive to have happen. So I just love how that evolved for you and how that got to stick. And, being, the courage coach, right? If you can't take courageous action and step outside of yourself and do something not only fun, but courageous, then, hey, that's part of that living up to the name.
Well, I exactly right. Like, it's just like every single day, Diane, like, how would the world's best courage coach conduct himself? And it doesn't always pay off, right? But it has, it makes you memorable and sticky. And if someone goes, oh, that's right, that crazy New Zealand guy, with no shirt on, like that thing that he said really helped me. Like that's all that matters, right?
Absolutely. So you have your own podcast about becoming your own superhero. Tell me what you love about it.
I worked out earlier this year, Diane, no jokes, that I have been given, whatever you want to call it, $1 million+ worth of free coaching, podcast, like masterminds, like courses to do, invitations to powerful people through the podcast. And I was humbled because I don't have a huge audience, right, compared to some of the other shows. And I was able to bring some of my heroes, a lot of my heroes, on as guests, and it connected me with people like you. Do you know what I mean? Like, so the non-quantifiable components of having a podcast are infinite, but that alone, like, I always read the books of the people that I interview. So as a result, like, I've read more than 550 books in the last 4.5 years now. Like, and when you start consuming that much, and they're all like professional development, there's no fiction apart from modern day parables, like they're all self-help books, that type of thing. When you start consuming that much knowledge, you start to get a really intimate feel for like how the world works, and it makes life infinitely easier to live and exist. So that's one beautiful byproduct. Last year, we spent 6 months in the United States on 2 separate trips. 4 of those months we spent as guests in the homes of former podcast guests. Like, life-changing, transformational stuff when not only do you get to have one-on-one time with your heroes, but you get to live with them and see how they operate. And, Jim Rohn talks about you become like the 5 people you spend the most time around. Like, that's all we've done for the last couple of years. And so that's one of my favorite things. And as a result, from some advice that I got from people that are far better at this than I am, they were like, Laban, your superpower is being able to connect and bring on big name guests onto a podcast, even if you don't have a big audience, and to be able to leverage relationships in a way that is meaningful to the guest and to you. And so I created a program called Podcasting Heroes. And if they want to get the free training, just go to podcastingheroes.com. And you'll get 5 of these videos which start teaching about some of the stuff, because like you don't like, a podcast for me, Diane, is like the easiest barrier of entry to getting your message out there. And some of the guests that I've interviewed are not that popular on the mainstream, and I've had videos deleted and I've been shadow banned, but it's irrelevant because I've been able to have access to these people, and the relationships, even though the video is deleted, the relationship still exists with the person. And that's culminated, I don't know when this will be aired, but I got invited to speak on Brad Lee's podcast called Dropping Bombs alongside Dr. Peter McCullough later this year in person in Las Vegas. Dr. Peter McCullough, for those who don't know, was the guy that Joe Rogan interviewed, and it was Joe Rogan's biggest ever downloaded podcast with 44 million downloads. Like I get to be seen alongside this guy and these 2 guys. And that started from me just creating the podcast. So I can't speak more highly of the impact you can have on the world, particularly if you want to be known as the world's most positively influential speaker. You got to do it some other way if you're a bit on the nose when it comes to some of the topics that you'd like to talk to people about.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that's so nice about, podcasting is you get to have real conversations with people, and people can feel your authenticity. They can feel like, where you're trying to support them, to help them, to give them resources. There's so much censorship in modern society that people don't realize that, to be able to have these kind of conversations is just, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, amen. And look at the connection that you and Anna and I have been able to have as a result of that connection. A life-changing experience with you and a friend of yours just earlier this year.
Yes.
And what an absolute, you can't quantify that with money, you can't quantify that with impact, but it was like a life-changing moment for us. And what I would say, Diane, for people that are listening or watching to this, that if you're listening for the first time or you're listening for the 100th, go out, rate and review in whatever truthful way possible this podcast, right? Because the only way that this message gets out with the world is by other people taking action. All right, go and review this, give it a real review, give it 5 stars or 1 star, whatever's in alignment with you, and share it with someone you care about. Diane is doing unbelievable work, and her background is just mind-blowing. And I know we haven't even had a chance to touch on it today, but that's my recommendation for the audience today. So Diane didn't set me up for that, but that's
well, that's just you, and I thank you for that. And in fact, you're actually going to be a landmark episode because you're going to be my 300th interview.
Wow, what an honor. That's awesome.
So that's exciting. And so that way you'll be memorable as well, as we continue to have these kind of conversations. And so, one of the things I always like to talk about with a guest is that how we create things, right? This is intentional living, and, how we live in our bedroom versus our office, our kitchen, right? Those all are different experiences. So what is your favorite room in your home and why?
So our routine for now is completely shot, right? Because we're traveling a lot.
Correct.
We're stay at a service department here. But when we're back in Mexico, we've got a 1-bedroom, split level, 2-story New York style apartment. It's just Anna and I. During the June, July parts of the year, the sun comes up at 4:45 a.m., 4:50 a.m. And the sun comes through the window. It's so hot that the windows are open and the drapes are open. So the sun comes in. I naturally wake up without an alarm. I go downstairs. I make my pot of beautiful organic Mexican coffee, and I sit down at my desk in that lounge room. And that for me is where I create most of my stuff in the first few hours of the day, between 5:30 and 8:30. So for me, if you had to pin down, I don't have too many rooms to choose from, but that'd be my favorite one for sure.
I love it. Well, what's so beautiful is I asked the same question of Anna, and she had the same experience of having that breathtaking view in the morning, waking up, and just having that sense of gratitude. So I love that you guys are on the same page with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't even listen to an interview either. So there you go. We didn't even collude.
So good. Well, I know, Laban, that people are going to want to stay in contact with you. How can they best do that?
Look, best thing to do is just go to my website and you can find whatever you need from there, labanditchburn.com. But for anyone that's interested in creating a podcast, already has a podcast, go and get the free training. Give me your email address, podcastingheroes.com, and I promise you there's some tremendous value in there.
Wonderful. I love it. And as you know, that our theme for this season is intentional living. So in what ways are you living an intentional life?
So I was trying to think about how I was going to respond to this question. Not that you prepped me for it at all, but I recently, Diane, have been working with one of my coaches around how I exit relationships. And I've been evolving at a fairly quick rate over the last few years. And what I would say to anyone listening is that don't be afraid to let go of relationships that aren't serving you well. And you don't need to do it in my style, but the more work I do on myself, it seems the more people I piss off. And it's necessary, right? Because what it does is it creates this wonderful space for other high quality people like Diane Halfman to come into your life. And for that, I'm eternally grateful for. So don't be afraid to be ruthless when it comes to your time and who you allow in your life.
Oh, that's beautiful advice. And, I just thank you for sharing your wisdom and your journey. And it's one of the things that we want to touch the heart of the people listening to this show today. And I know there's at least one person out there who has somebody in their life who is not supporting their journey, who is not, adding value to their life, and to give themselves permission to cut loose of those people who are in your life, right? And we know who they are, and it's that bless and release. It's not a judgment. It's not, you're better than someone or anything like that. We have people come into our life for seasons, reasons. There's all of those things that are part of our journey. And so the more we can identify that and move in that direction, the more it supports us as well. So I thank you again for that. And until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now.